I don't think anyone should believe that Republicans or Donald Trump are happy about him being a convicted felon, or that they think it's such a great thing for his campaign. If they thought it was such a great thing for his campaign, I think they would approach it very differently.
Hello and welcome to GZERO World. I'm Ian Bremmer, coming to you from, of all places, Las Vegas, Nevada, one of 7 swing states that could decide the most surreal presidential election in U.S. history. Which brings me to today's show. You've heard the news, you've seen the headlines, you probably already have an opinion, but we have to talk about it. Former President Donald Trump has been convicted of 34 felony counts in a New York criminal case about hush money payments on the eve of the 2016 election. It's the first time any U.S. president, current or former, has been found guilty of a crime. And of course, everyone is asking how this will impact the election. And the short answer, no one knows. Political forecasting after unprecedented news is famously a recipe for regret. But make no mistake, the verdict is having an impact. The Trump campaign announced it raised an astounding $53 million in the 24 hours after it was announced. A sign his base is fired up.
The real verdict is going to be November 5th by the people, and we'll keep fighting. We'll fight till the end, and we'll win.
Maybe more important than what the conviction means for Republicans or capital D Democrats is what it means for our already fragile lowercase d democracy. As historic as Trump's conviction is, the political response will be even more extraordinary.
This is garbage.
Republican leadership from far right to center has lined up behind their nominee, decrying the case as an illegitimate witch hunt and blatant political persecution. Democratic leaders say justice has been served, that Trump was treated like any other ordinary citizen, and the verdict is a sign the system works.
The American principle that no one is above the law was reaffirmed.
Democracy needs faith to function. We need free and fair elections, but just as importantly, they need to be seen as free and fair. Our country is in deep crisis if half the electorate thinks Trump is an existential threat to America's political institutions, and the other half are convinced those institutions have already been corrupted to their core. So where do we go from here? To talk through it, Preet Bharara, former U.S. Attorney, and Susan Glasser, New Yorker journalist. Delighted to see you both. Preet, let me start with you. So much of the backlash to this verdict from the GOP has been about the trial itself being illegitimate. Should this case have been brought in the way that it was by the district attorney, something you have a lot of experience with?
The accusations that some folks on the Trump side are making about how this was a politicized witch hunt, it was preordained, all of that misses a very important historical fact, and that is when Alvin Bragg came into office, there had been a number of prosecutors, including his predecessor, Cyrus Vance, who were building a case with respect to financial fraud against Trump. They ended up quitting with some fanfare when Alvin Bragg refused to pursue that case. So if Alvin Bragg came in with an agenda to get Donald Trump, he had a packaged case that he could have brought that very seasoned prosecutors who'd served both as federal prosecutors and state prosecutors had wrapped up in a bow for him to do. But he thought, in exercise of his discretion and using his judgment, that that was not appropriate. And this other case was one that after some period of time, he decided to bring. And by the way, it was an open and fair proceeding. There was a judge who ruled, often for the prosecution, but often as well for Donald Trump's side, 12 jurors who were screened. And by the way, the defense got to participate in the selection of that jury, found him guilty pretty definitively and pretty quickly. And there will now be an opportunity for an appeal. So, all the hallmarks of a free and open rule of law proceeding were met here. And look, there's going to be an appeal. The people on the Trump side are saying it's a foregone conclusion that this conviction will be overturned. I don't think that's the case. In the same way that I don't think it's the case that it's 100% guaranteed that the conviction will be affirmed. I think there are non-frivolous issues that can be raised, and we'll see how a court of appeals thinks about that. And ultimately, if there's a constitutional question, which I'm not sure that there is, but if there's a constitutional question,
then it would go to the Supreme Court.
Go to the Supreme Court. So it's never possible to say that there's no possibility of a reversal. But by the way, for people who are interested in the political clock here, in the timetable, there's no way that any of that's going to happen any time before the election.
Right. And one thing that is going to happen before the election, of course, is sentencing. Do you have any quick view on what the likely sentence is going to be? I assume you don't think there's going to be serious jail time.
Well, the violations don't call for serious jail time. There are factors on both sides. On the one hand, he's a 77-year-old man who may not be a recidivist, for whom this is a first-time offense. On the other hand, it's serious misconduct, the way it was characterized by the prosecution. Some of the conduct happened while he was sitting in the Oval Office as Commander-in-Chief and President of the United States. He has shown no remorse. He has violated the gag order 10 times. Those are factors in favor of some time of incarceration. What I think is pretty clearly the case, though, is even if the judge decides that some period of incarceration is appropriate, 3 months, 6 months, 8 months, whatever, that he will hold that in abeyance and give him bail pending appeal, right? Because I think he will find that there's a significant enough basis to allow Trump, and it also solves the problem of his getting criticized for putting a major party candidate in prison, and I think he wants to avoid that. And so he can have his cake sort of and eat it too by imposing a prison sentence, but holding off on it until a court of appeals weighs in on it.
Susan, appreciate your patience. I want to turn to you on the politics now. You wrote in your column, it was last week, that the GOP's revisionist history on the trial has already begun. Last Sunday, Republican Chair Lara Trump, related, berated Republican candidate Larry Hogan for calling on citizens to respect the judicial process.
He doesn't deserve the respect of anyone in the Republican Party at this point, and quite frankly, anybody in America, if that's the way you feel. That's very upsetting to hear that.
What do you make of all of this?
This is a marker of the escalation that we're seeing in 2024. And so it's not just attacking the legitimacy of this specific trial or these specific charges against Donald Trump, but the immediate leap, and I should say clearly orchestrated in advance, leap to a broader systemic attack. And I think that is certainly an ominous sign as far as what Trump might do were he to be reelected to office. But even more broadly, I think it's a sign of where the Republican Party is at, that they have essentially mortgaged the party so completely to the fate of one individual that they're willing to tear down what remains of faith in our already, sort of teetering faith in institutions. So it strikes me that it's sometimes hard in this kind of year 9 of the Trump era to say sort of when we have crossed another line. But to me, I think we crossed another line. And the response to Larry Hogan, the former Republican governor of the very blue state of Maryland, was very instructive. Hogan didn't have some big statement celebrating Trump's conviction. All he said was what in the past would have been essentially comforting mush. Yay, the system works, support the right to a jury trial. And, nothing very interesting about it, except that even that is too controversial in today's GOP.
I think Susan makes excellent points. And it's one thing to criticize the judge, criticize the parties, criticize the press and the coverage. It's quite a different thing to start criticizing ordinary Americans who are pressed into the civic duty of jury deliberation and service. And the second point I want to make is the other accusation that is being leveled, which is kind of far-fetched and outlandish, which is par for the course, about why Alvin Bragg brought the case and why he shouldn't have, is that it was all orchestrated by the puppeteer, President of the United States, Joe Biden. Alvin Bragg was not appointed, like I was, by the President of the United States, but was elected by the people of Manhattan. He doesn't report to the President. He doesn't talk to the President. He doesn't take direction from the President. And the other thing that makes it very peculiar and odd is that we are to believe that Joe Biden pulled the puppet strings on Alvin Bragg to get the rule of law to be shaped in the way he wanted it to take down his rival, when as we speak, literally as we speak, his own flesh and blood son is on trial
on
federal
Hunter
court.
Biden, which I want to get to. Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, so the point is one, and Joe Biden has not fired the special prosecutor. He hasn't tried to pardon his son. He hasn't tried to interfere in that. And so the idea that he's directing Alvin Bragg and doing nothing to save the skin of his own son doesn't square.
It's on its face ludicrous. Now, Preet, I want to ask you brought up the Hunter Biden trial. It is now just underway. Can you talk a little bit about the significance of that trial?
Hunter Biden is a private citizen, has always been a private citizen. He's not the President of the United States. He's not running to be the President of the United States. He's getting all this attention because of his celebrity based on his connection by blood to the sitting president of the United States. Do the counterfactual for a moment. In a million years, can you imagine if Donald Trump got reelected and a Joe Biden appointed U.S. attorney who was held over for some period of time decided to indict and go to trial against Donald Trump Jr., that Donald Trump Sr. would stand idly by, not comment on it, not pardon his son, not direct.
No, it's inconceivable. It's inconceivable.
Inconceivable.
That's right.
That's right. So when you ask what's the significance of it, that significance, I think, is being lost on people. Now, on the question of the seriousness of the charge, lots of people have commented that we have a series of gun laws in place. I prosecuted a number of them, of illegal possession of a handgun. Most commonly, that's brought if you're a prior convicted felon. By the way, incidental to this and the intersection of the Trump case and the Hunter Biden case is Donald Trump, now convicted, cannot possess a firearm. So put that to the side for a moment. What's also super interesting here that I haven't heard a lot talked about is you have a strange collection of bedfellows here. Ordinarily, right, the average progressive would say you have to enforce the gun laws very strictly. By contrast, the average conservative who believes strongly in the Second Amendment would say that is an overreach. And just because you've been convicted of a crime, in the example I gave before, doesn't mean you should forever forfeit your constitutional right. In the same way that a lot of people say, just because you've been convicted of a crime, you shouldn't forfeit your right to vote forever and ever and ever. So, this is the other significance of it is you can sort of tell where people are tribally as opposed to where they would be if this was an anonymous, unknown garden variety defendant.
It's very important to make the distinction between, these are the ultimate sort of asymmetrical cases. Donald Trump was accused of, essentially distorting the 2016 election by paying this hush money to a former porn star. Hunter Biden is accused, private citizen is accused of owning a gun for 11 days and possibly lying on a form about it. Now, I think you're right about the tribalism, absolutely. And it does strike me that Joe Biden, has had terrible luck with this son. The timing of it is just, you couldn't even make this up. That literally while the Democrats finally get a couple days where they're focusing the lens squarely in this election for once, not on Biden's age or, what his record is in the country, but on Donald Trump and his fitness for office. And do they want a convicted felon in the White House? And then boom, 2 days later, Hunter Biden is on trial. The timing just is a reminder that Biden can't seem, to catch a break. We're talking a lot about the case itself in New York or the case itself now in Delaware. But I also think it's important to pull back and to say, why is this happening? No matter how much they spin me, I do not believe, and I don't think anyone should believe that Republicans or Donald Trump are happy about him being a convicted felon or that they think it's such a great thing for his campaign. If they thought it was such a great thing for his campaign, I think they would approach it very differently.
We have also seen an extraordinary amount of money that's been raised by Trump on the back of this effort, this very coordinated campaign by Republicans to say this is a political hit job, it's a witch hunt, it's orchestrated by the president. And then secondly, revealed preferences, Americans just don't seem to say that this case matters as much to them and how they vote and what they care about than issues that are closer to them on a day-to-day basis, like, for example, inflation, like abortion, like the border. We're all sitting here talking about these unprecedented threats to the democratic system in the United States, which are clearly getting worse, and yet either elites, the media, and the citizenry don't seem to be taking it enormously seriously.
I got to push back on that. I think that is the kind of cynical perspective, this idea that we're going to get into the media and elites bashing. Americans are perfectly, in the end, there's a long history that suggests that, while issue polls are interesting and relevant, and certainly the economy, you can argue, has been a major driver of American elections, in the end, the history of modern presidential elections is that they are very much decided on the basis of perceptions around the personality of the candidates, number one. Number two, it is not a media construction. It is not an elite construction to say, I find that to be really cynical, actually. The idea that a regular American who is not a member of the media elite should not care that the possible president of the United States is going to be a convicted felon. I don't buy that. I think that's what Republicans want us to say. In the end, I don't think I think that fundraising numbers in June are going to have any effect on the ultimate outcome of this presidential election. I think that we're looking at a very close race because we have a very evenly divided country. And the question is really not what Americans in the aggregate think about this development of having a president who's a convicted felon. The very specific question is whether in the 6 or 7 battleground states that are going to decide this election, there are sufficient number of concerned Republicans and or independents who simply cannot vote for Trump because he is a convicted felon.
I mean, I understand, but a piece of it seems to be that nobody's all that worried. Maybe it's like the boy that cried wolf. I mean, Trump was already a president once for 4 years and democracy didn't fall apart. And a lot of people had egg on face. And so, a lot of people said January 6th was a coup. I don't believe it was actually attempted coup. I don't think that was the right way to think about it. I don't think the U.S. system was actually in danger the way it increasingly is this time around. But I'm discussing this in part because here we are in the middle, only 5 months away now from the election. Soon people are going to start voting absentee. And most of them, it seems to me, aren't going to be voting on the issue that we're talking about right now, that we seem to think is very important. Preet, do you want to weigh in on this?
There are people on the progressive side, on the Biden side, who think that democracy is in danger. I'm one of those people. I care about institutions. I think people care less about institutions and less about process and less about principles than they care about outcome. I think we become a very, not just tribal, but the part of the tribalism that I think is showing a lot of force is the person on your side, whether it's abortion or trade or whatever else. And on the progressive side, the issues that they care about. And, the way in which some of this conversation is a little bit elite, but I don't think that's a bad thing because I think our founding fathers were elite. And lots of people on the right always invoke the founding fathers, which is a very elitist concept, right? The idea of democracy and institutions and separation of powers and political philosophy and political theory, those that's elite subject matter, but it's the backbone and foundation of the country. And I worry that some of that is being lost because nobody seems to care that much anymore. All the other things that you want, whether it's the freedom to bear arms or to have reproductive rights or anything else, all relies on a well-functioning pluralistic democracy. And if you start, talking about these as being only elitist thoughts, I think we're in big trouble.
Well, you can see we've hit the, the kind of sensitive nerve of this 2024 election. And I just, again, on the point about whether this is, an elite preoccupation or not, I think it's actually at the core of the matter because it strikes me that what Trump tried to do and what this conviction is about, what he tried to do in 2020 as well as 2016 was to nullify the votes of an election and therefore of the people, the masses votes, not the individuals. Remember that millions and millions more Americans voted for Joe Biden. You're, dismissing January 6th as sort of, I'm not sure, what, but this was a direct effort to seek to stop the certification of the people's votes, both the millions of Americans who voted more for Biden than Trump and also in the states, Biden's victory. And it wasn't about the solidity of the institutions or the idea that democracy held. It's that they were much more vulnerable and fragile, and that after the 2020 election, we were much closer than we thought we would be, because it wasn't the institutions, it was one individual. We were one attorney general, one acting attorney general, one vice president, one chairman of the Joint Chiefs away from what would have been a coup on the constitutional order. I don't know why it is that people find it too hard to remember that occurred only not even 4 years ago, but that is literally like an unthinkable thing. And having crossed that Rubicon, I think that the idea that we're just treating this as a normal election between two warring tribes with different ideologies is really, that's what history is going to remember about this moment, unfortunately.
We've grown accustomed to the luxury of repeated peaceful transfers of power, things always work out for the United States of America. We're the greatest country in the world and have been for a very long time. The greatest country ever for a lot of reasons, notwithstanding the crises we find ourselves plunged into now. And so there's a tendency on the part of some people, I think, when other people ring the bell and worry that you're overreacting. And my concern is that the rest of the folks are underreacting, and it's impossible. There is nothing that guarantees in the rule of law, in the world order, or by God's grace, if you believe in that, that just because the United States has been a great democracy, it will persist in being democratic. And just because we haven't before elected someone like Donald Trump, a deceitful populist who likes to pit people against each other, he's a different order of person. And I think that people are underestimating the pain and damage that will be caused to the country if he's reelected. And a part of that is because of perpetual American optimism, I think, that things always work out. We get into a recession, we get into a depression, we work our way out of it. The world is plunged into war. America comes to the rescue. America always is resilient and resolves to fix itself. And I just don't know that faith is as well placed as it used to be.
Susan, last word to you.
Yeah, I mean, this is a powerful conversation, Ian. We may have a history that marks us as different than all the other countries in the world. But at the same time, I think the events of the last 8 years have shown pretty clearly that we might not be as exceptional as we think we are. It's not an accident that there have been these kind of rise of far-right populism in so many countries around the world over the last few years. There's a pretty clear playbook that shows that Trump is running down the checklist of a would-be authoritarian. And that's the context in which I think we should view things like the attack on the jury's verdict in the trial. And by the way, I don't think we know the answer yet. I don't think we know the outcome yet. And I remember the words of the second gentleman, Doug Emhoff, when he was asked, what's the election going to be about? And he said it's going to be two things. It's going to be democracy and Dobbs. That's the Supreme Court ruling throwing out Roe versus Wade. There's a strong chance that he's correct about that. And
well, that's what he wants it to be about, certainly. There's no question.
Yeah, we'll see. Yeah. We'll see.
Susan Glasser, Preet Bharara, thanks so much for joining today.
Thanks for having us.
That's our show this week. Come back next week, and if you like what you see, or even if you don't, but you're worried about whether the United States will still be a democracy, why don't you take a minute and sign up for our most excellent morning newsletter? It's called GZERO Daily.